Every build begins long before the first block is ever placed. It starts with a question, sometimes a feeling, sometimes just a blank sketch of land that asks to be something more, and sometimes someone on the server just says, build something here. In this episode, I want to take you inside that process, what it looks like for me, the way that ideas take shape, how I pick the right spot, and what guides each decision from blueprint to final detail. We'll start, as all good things do, with the location, and then from there, I'll sketch the vision, lay the foundation, and walk you through every stage from the bones of the build to the finishing touches that bring it to life. So, if you've ever looked at a finished build and wondered how it got from nothing to, well, that, then this is for you. Hello there, beautiful pixels. My name is Alaydriem, and welcome back to Truly Bedrock Season 7, where today, we're going to be doing something a little bit different. And as you might have surmised from that intro, today I am going to be showing you what my process looks like for building something here in Minecraft. Now, I don't claim to be a master builder or an expert designer, but over time, people have told me they like the things that I make. And the truth is, there's always a process to it. So in this episode, I want to pull back the curtain a little, not to teach necessarily, but to show what I do, how I think through a build, where I start, and how I make decisions along the way. And if it helps someone else find their flow or feel a little less stuck when staring at a blank canvas, then I hope that it is worth sharing and you find it valuable as well. So, let's go ahead and get started, because I have been contracted to build a shop here in the shopping district, and frankly, we need more shops in the shopping district. And the first thing that I normally do when planning out a new build is think of the three most important words ever stated in humanity: location, location, location. And I know that it sounds really kind of rhetorical and contrite, but it's true. Location matters. So at the beginning of the season, I placed down a head here thinking this is where I'm going to want to build. And since then, we've had other builds come up. And now I need to start thinking about how my build is going to integrate with this and what the location is going to look like. So thinking through what's here, there's most likely going to be a road that pushes down through here, just based upon what things are at. And I want to make sure that my build is going to be complementary to anything that Zloy has already built. Zloy has big manor, kind of fantasy adjacent type buildings, more on the realistic side than the fantastical side, but I want to make sure that whatever I'm building is going to complement this, which means we need to take this town center, this town square, as the primary focal point, and we want to make sure that whatever we're building follows this gradual slope down. That means a couple things for me. One, that means that my build cannot be taller than the town square build, which I think is important when you're kind of designing a fantasy roof and realistic thing. There might be like the occasional really tall tower every now and then, but for the most part, the center needs to be the tallest. And I need to make sure that whatever I'm building is going to complement this in some way, while still keeping with my general aesthetic. So if I'm taking a look at what I've already kind of planned out here, I feel that I need to bring my build down. I know that I'm going to build very tall, pointed roofs, and I know that it's going to block sightlines unless I figure out a way to make it smaller, or in this case, bring it down. And what comes to mind right away is this big old empty patch of land right here that is just screaming to be terraformed. And what I normally will do is I'll just really roughly, in a creative world, or sometimes even in the survival world, I generally will do things in the survival world for fun, is mark out the rough size that I want the build to fit on. Now, this is really rough, but it gives me the idea of the size and the shape and the scope of where I want to build. It doesn't tell me what it's going to look like, but it does give me some constraints that I can work with and help me to start focusing on what the build's going to look like, as well as what the landscaping is going to start to look like too. From here, I burst out the pen and paper and start sketching out what I want this build to actually look like. And no, this is not my foray into hand modeling. This is literally what my process looks like for any single one of the builds that I have. Now, I'm not saying that I have that thing where you can't see things in your mind, aphantasia, but I cannot see things in my mind at all whatsoever. So I need to sketch things down, I need to have it written down, and I need to see it and be able to constantly visually reference it. But I can incorporate elements that I have seen and that I can look at on my screen into something. So immediately I first start with what the landscape is going to be. I think landscaping is probably one of the most important parts in Minecraft that really can help your build stand out from just building a build on a blank canvas. And immediately I start thinking about, I know that I need to extend that terrain out a little bit and add something interesting there. And I think just like a platform of arches could be more than enough to help fill that out. From there, I start drawing the general shape of a house. I generally build fantasy adjacent type builds, which means I'm going to build things with arches, big windows, lots of natural light, lots of varied colors, lots of contrasting colors, and most importantly, large pointy roofs. Now, there's a ton of ways for you to get inspiration for what to build. I really like Pinterest, Google search, YouTube. There's a ton of things that you can reference, but generally, I know what I like and I know what I want things to look like in general. And in general, I like things with big roofs because big roofs really just make Minecraft look better. So once I have the general outline of the build that I want to do, I will basically draw a line all the way up here from the center and make the pointiest roof that I can, because large pointy roofs look better in Minecraft. That is my opinion, and as far as I'm concerned, it is gospel fact. You can make short stubby roofs, but long pointed roofs are going to look so much better. It's going to show more colors, it's going to show more of the build, and it's just going to be more aesthetically pleasing to look at given the voxel nature. Now for this build, I'm going to want to also not just have it be one pointy roof, but also have something to kind of stick out beside of it and make it a little bit more interesting. Add something that will give it some animations, like fires up here to simulate smoke coming from a chimney, and then kind of just throw in a rough idea of where I'm going to want windows in. I know that this is going to be a glass shop, and I'm going to try to incorporate some elements of glass into this, either by adding glass directly or having large open windows that kind of represent what I want them to be. From here, this is more or less what I'm going to want the build to look like. Generally, for materials, I'll use what I have on hand, but fantasy adjacent things usually means that stone is always a really solid option, spruce or dark oak for the roof arches, and then any other type of block that I'm interested in experimenting with. So for instance, I really haven't done a lot of work with pale oak since it came out, so I'm going to be thinking maybe the front of this needs to be white with pale oak, and then I'm going to want to use some of the blocks that I have on hand that I've used for my previous build in order to make the roof itself. So maybe some green, maybe migrating over into some slight yellows. And from here, this is more or less what I want the build to look like. It isn't perfect, it isn't exact. I don't know what all the elements are going to look like, but I feel that I can always just figure them out along the way. So with this in mind, and this is my template that I can constantly reference back to, it's time for us to take what we've sketched out here and move it over into Minecraft. And that brings us to the first stage of the build, which is incorporating the build into the terrain somehow. Sometimes I'll save this for last, but in this build, I know that I need to incorporate this somehow, which means throwing in these archways. Now, very quickly, when you're building this, you discover that the 15 archways that I had drawn previously doesn't really jive with the fact that only 5 fit. And I think 5 is a nice even number, even though it's odd, and it's very, very easy for us to subdivide this. It gives it basically a nice center point to the build. Once we kind of incorporate this into the landscape, I can start clearing out where I want things to be. I have a rough idea of what I wanted the house to look like based upon kind of some window placements, but I'm gonna just really, really roughly terrain this up, add a lot of light so that we can get rid of mob spawning, and then think of like, where's the entranceway to this gonna be? We're gonna have something over here to the right, and then obviously a couple of things kind of stacking up to the main road. I wanna make sure that I have a lot of those elements figured out first. From there, it's really just a matter of building the basic shape of the house, getting in some of those design elements that I initially had, and then adding the most important element, which is that roof line. I like really tall roofs, as I said, and I always like to add a little bit of a swoop in there. Now, Structura is a really great tool in order to make sure that all of your blocks line up really nice and neat, but as you can see here, it's easy enough in Minecraft for you to kind of eyeball it and then make any corrections that you need. As you can see here, lots of alterations done to this roof in order to make it fit. Now from here, I like to start thinking about what I want the roof to look like. And I generally will take a look at a build that I'm looking at. And by the way, this is a build I haven't started on yet. And I'll try to see what can I do in terms of colors. Gradients always look really, really good, especially if you can go from dark all the way over to light. I think that for this build though, I'm wanting to keep the color palette relatively simple, which means that I should probably stick with one sort of thing. And as I've said before, since I'm already kind of dealing with greens, it should be fairly easy for me to grab all the materials in order to transition more into this green yellow phase. So moss, green terracotta, maybe some green concrete, some bamboo, and then some bamboo planks as well. But don't worry, we will get to that awesome roof that has all those colors too. And then for the main build, I'm thinking pale oak, and then we have some calcite and some diorite, and then also some quartz here as well. We may decide just to have this be stripped pale oak logs and regular pale oak logs, depending upon how things look. I don't know. We'll see. But generally at this point, this is when I start thinking about colors. And since I've already thought of the colors that I want for the roof, it's time for us to head out into the world and actually grab those blocks. And rather than bore you with a nice long time lapse of me gathering materials, let me just show you what I want to work with. So we have this block palette right here. Some of this warp stem, some green terracotta, moss, bamboo, which is so easy to harvest, and then some bamboo planks as well. I'm wanting with this build to challenge myself in order to keep the block palette relatively small. I could certainly add in another 10 blocks to this in order to make this roof much more vibrant and much more gradiated. But I'm not, because one of the challenges I'm giving myself this build is to keep the block palette simple and preferably within 1 hotbar's worth. So this is kind of the color that I'm gonna be working with for our roof. This is what I want it to look like. I'm thinking that for the roof, we're gonna want to limit it on the yellow end of things and keep more to the greens and some more of the turquoise, because I do have a lot of the warped planks that we have here from the previous build. So I'm gonna kind of focus more on the darker end of the build, and then we'll incorporate the yellows a little more sparingly up on the top. And compressing this down into like a minute time lapse doesn't really do it justice, but we're trying to keep the outside of the build one color and then just keep the gradient going as we go from the bottom to the top. If you think of the way that like water works, you're gonna have more of the gunk and the dark stuff kind of settle at the bottom where water has run, unless there's a way that water can flush that out and keep it very, very clean. So I'm thinking with this build, like down in the corners, for instance, we're gonna have some of these darker blocks, and then we'll mix in some of these warp stem where maybe water has seared away, maybe a little bit of the paint or some of the material or whatever it may be. And at the top, we'll have maybe this pristine yellow color of these bamboo planks, just to make it look like maybe it's sun-skulled a little bit. Maybe it's just the way that it looks. I also decided rather spontaneously to take advantage of these pink cactus flowers because it gave your eye something a little more to look at. And throughout this process, I am constantly taking a step back and looking at what the build looks like from various different angles, because I want to make sure that regardless of how you view this, you are going to be able to appreciate the build. Now, when you take a step back, you also start to notice a few subtle things that you feel need to be changed. So for instance, looking at this right away, I feel that the yellow that we have is too concentrated at the top. It doesn't blend very well. And also that streak of turquoise straight down the center doesn't really blend well throughout the build. It feels like it's kind of stuck there in the center, which makes it feel like maybe the roof should be caved in rather than it blending across the entire roof. So generally, I'll take a look around, I'll fly around, I'll look at it from all the various different angles that I have, and I'll just try to think of what needs to be changed in order to make this look the best where it's gonna sit at. So this is more or less what my process looks like. Little refinements here, step back, take a look, make those refinements, step back, take a look again, and continue to do so. And like I said earlier, adding in just a little splotch of color, like in the instance, the pink of the cactus flowers here, really helps break up a lot of those patterns too. And before I get any of the windows in, generally what I will do is then kind of throw up the basic walls. So you can see here, I have now finished up the roof. We've added a little details here on the roof line. As you can see here, just like a little bit of this warp fungus and a little bit of the skulk blocks, just in order to give it a little more variation. But then here on the walls, I decided ultimately to stick with one color, which is the pale oak logs that are stripped, and then also the pale oak planks. I thought that when I added calcite and a couple other things that it was just too much to look at, and it didn't blend very well. So that leaves me kind of with this general shape that we have right here. Now, of course, I know that I need to put archways in here on the front. I haven't quite decided at this point what the sides are going to look like and how we're going to incorporate a lot of natural light. And I really don't know what I'm going to do with this giant space in the back. We may just end up walling it off, but I'm just trying to constantly give you something to look at. It doesn't need to be overwhelming, but the build needs to have something that says, look here. Oh, look, that's pretty. And then it directs your eye over just a little bit where your brain says, ooh, look at that. That's pretty too. So all throughout all of my builds, I'm trying to make sure that your eye has something to look at, that it just says, ooh, that's pretty. Next, that's pretty too. Next, oh, and that is pretty as well. Just so that you can keep having something to look at over and over and over again. And as you can see here, I feel that we've really nailed kind of that slope that I was trying to get integrated in here. So at this point, it's time to slap in the windows. I was thinking originally that I was going to get some stained glass, but looking at this road here, if this road's going to kind of plow right through here, we kind of just have like an entrance to the second story of this. So what I might do instead is to make these little smaller windows and kind of forgo the stained glass effect. I don't think that I'd be able to pull off stained glass with the limited amount of space that I have right here. I know that this seems huge, but this is not enough space to work with for like a stained glass portrait of any kind, at least that I would want to do. So what we'll probably do is just knock out a few windows so that we can have that simulation of natural light. And then from there, we can kind of just fill out the rest of the build. From here, the rest of the decorating really is up to personal preference and aesthetics. I'm trying to always give there something to look at, because otherwise things get bland very, very quickly. So the door needs to be interesting, using chiseled bookshelves down here in order to make things look interesting down below, and then using fence gates up here to really kind of spice things up a little bit. Windows, I think, are a little bit easier. So for here, I wanted to make kind of a balcony effect that maybe you could walk out from the second story, and then kind of just do some really basic standard roof stuff. Nothing too incredibly fancy. Repeat that kind of on the other side here. Now, I do try to mix things up a little bit because I don't think the house should be perfectly symmetrical. And to be honest with you, I really like what I did on this side a whole lot more than what I ended up doing here on the other side. But it's important that you spend some time experimenting with how things look, because otherwise you'll never know. And from this point, I basically consider the build to be done. Now, as a shop, I know that there's things that I need to do. I obviously need to work on the interior, but once the skeleton of the shop is up, or any of the builds, it's usually good enough for me to start focusing on what my next project's going to be, whether that's the interior or another build altogether. So you let me know down in the comments what you think about what we have here so far. And let me take you around kind of more in the normal first person view. A couple of things that I have made changes with that's a little bit different from what I was originally talking about previously. So we have a little bit of brick incorporated in here. We also have obviously a lot of flowers in here. Again, landscaping is very, very important. Just a little bit of landscaping really makes everything much, much more interesting altogether. If you omit the landscaping component, I think that you're missing out on a good portion of the build. So we have more or less everything that I've sketched out in here. I've done some very minor interior decorating here. I've left this nice and big and open and airy. I know that that isn't necessarily reminiscent of what I originally sketched out, but on the whole, it does reflect the idea of that this is a glass shop and we're dealing with a lot of light. Now, like I said earlier, I'm generally very happy with this build. There's a couple things that I think that I'll probably tweak in between episodes, chiefly these front windows. I don't feel that they necessarily match. I do like the windows, they just don't fit what I was doing here in this build. Again, also covering a little bit of this stone and this brick in, I think really kind of helps blend it and make it look like maybe this build is a little bit more aged and a little bit less static. I also elected over here to kind of leave these sides open. Oh, by the way, this is my favorite side of the build, by the way. But leaving the sides open so that we can let lots of natural light in, I think was also a good decision. I didn't really want to close off the build so much. I know that, you know, with the builds that we have up here, having it closed off is clearly the right decision, but I think there's some builds where just having it more open does ultimately feel like the best decision to make. So that's the process, or at least my process. It's rarely perfect. It's never exactly what I pictured or drew down, but that's all part of the fun. From choosing the spot, fiddling with the roof colors, deciding which piece of inspiration really resonated with you in order to build the windows, it's all just one decision at a time, over and over and over again. And the more that you build, the more I found those decisions start to feel like instincts. So if something in this video has helped you, whether it was the technique, the mindset, or just knowing you don't have to be perfect in order to make something you're proud of, then I'm glad to share it, and I hope that you have found it useful. Thank you so much, beautiful pixels, for watching. I hope that you've enjoyed this episode. Let me know what you think about this build or the technique down in the comments below, and I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. Bye.